Happy Sunday, everyone. For those of you watching live and joining as I start this up, there's only minutes to spare before it is no longer Sunday. I just got back from a trip to Cancun with the family, and our flight was delayed. And I wanted to do this while we were in Cancun because we had a few hours to spare at the airport because of a delayed flight, but the connection was not great at all. So keeping the tradition alive. Haven't missed a Sunday since I started, and we'll see how long we can keep going. This is going to be a short one given the hour at which I'm recording it, being past 11 on Sunday night. But I wanted to share this question of belief and what it means to have different beliefs. Last night when we were in Cancun, we went to a big theme park called Xcaret, and it's this big to-do, and they have, this Mayan kind of stuff interweaved and everything. And we're at this dinner, and the dinner featured this elaborate dance, dozens and dozens and dozens of dancers, performers, singers, really cool stuff. And we had this 7-course meal, and all these things were amazing. It was a really fun experience. And the story throughout the whole song and dance is talking about, the kind of early Mayan civilizations, all the different people, and all of the kind of polytheistic, religion they had or whatever. Basically, that they worshipped all these gods and the sun and had all these sacrifices. And then, it kind of showed the Spanish conquistadores coming to, dominate them, domesticate them, you might say, impose the Christian religion on them, convert them. And it was really interesting. I was thinking about that dynamic of, changing belief. And here you have all these colonial, I guess not colonial people, but, early Mesoamerican people who believed all kinds of different things. They changed their religion. The religion itself is evolving, different teachings, different creeds, all these things. And then I was thinking about my own belief, right? That my belief has evolved. I no longer believe some of the things that I did when I was young, when I was a missionary, when I was a primary kid, when I was, a few years ago, I don't know. I no longer believe some of those things, and I have some new beliefs, and different things in the church itself have changed. Sometimes we call them policies because we don't want to believe perhaps that doctrine has changed. But you look at, like early church teachings versus stuff happening now. And that's the easy stuff is to talk about, but the easier references would be like, black people and the priesthood. But I mean, like take Adam God theory, for example, or blood atonement or some of these other crazy cockamamie Brigham Young ideas. But, these were widely taught and widely believed and kind of woven into the doctrinal fabric of the church, and people believed them. And if, for those of you who have listened to these for a while, you may remember that I shared an example in one of the early musings that I did, where I try to imagine myself as an individual the day before, or week, or month, or year before the church changed its position on blacks in the priesthood. And for a member of the church to believe and then to advocate that, the church was wrong about that, or that black people are worthy to have the priesthood, that they're not, we're not inferior in the, premortal realm, that they were not assigned a black body because they were, unrighteous or whatever. For someone to have that belief, they would have been out of alignment with the church. They would have been considered by their fellow members to be, you might even say, apostate, to be trying to study the ark, to be believing and advocating the wrong things. And yet that individual would have then shortly been vindicated, you might say, when the church's position changed, where that individual did not change their beliefs. The broader membership was kind of led or required to change beliefs when the, policy changed. But that individual would have been consistent. And yet It was the broader membership of the church that was out of alignment with that individual who, was in alignment, you might say, with God. So, I wonder what that means for the modern church, and how we handle people who have different beliefs. Now, you might say, look, no one would ever be punished for what they believe, right? Like, you're allowed to believe what you want. You just can't advocate for things that are out of alignment with, the brethren or with the church and its official doctrines. Well, that's kind of interesting on a couple fronts. The first is that, church policy and even doctrine has changed. Second is the inconsistent application in which these things are handled. I don't think I coined this. I heard it somewhere, years ago, but this idea of leadership roulette, where, remember Russian roulette, where there's one bullet in the chamber of a revolver and there's 6, spots. And so you roll the whatever, and then you pull the trigger. And so that's Russian roulette, right? You got a 1 in 6 chance of, killing the person. And so leadership roulette is this idea that the judges in Israel, as we call them, the bishops at the local level, inconsistently apply, consequence to individuals who may need punishment or discipline of some sort. And so you can live in one ward and have a bishop who's totally supportive and patient and kind and fine and, lenient, you might say. But you might happen to have another bishop just because you chose years prior to live in a different area. And so now you have a bishop who's more of a hard-nosed, hardliner, traditional, whatever, inflexible. And just because you chose to live in that particular place, you now have a different leader and therefore different eternal consequences for your belief, even though your beliefs haven't changed. So, that's a tough thing when you have power distributed to local levels. It's going to be inconsistently applied, right? And so you might say, well, we want conformity, we want uniformity, top down, which is how we got what were the standards called? The correlation, right? It was Harold B. Lee who didn't like that the church all over the world was, different things, different teachings, different customs, whatever. And so he wanted to homogenize the church and create a set standard that people sing praises about this all the time. Like, oh, the church is the same no matter where you go. You can go to, South Korea, or you could go to, the Congo or France or whatever. And the church is the same, and it's the same, hymnals and the same lesson manuals and everything. Well, that was Harold B. Lee, who, pushed for all that, despite disagreements from some of his brethren, but he eventually got his way. So, there's benefits to correlation. There's benefits to standardization. And so what would that look like for discipline, for belief at an organizational level, to say that across the whole church, we're going to have one set standard for, when some will be punished, but then it still has to be determined whether that policy was violated or whether the punishment is merited. So I think of it kind of like a jury or a judge, right? Where sometimes you might get a judge who throws a case out, and sometimes you get a judge who sentences you to life, right? And so that's troubling, certainly when you're dealing with like sending someone to jail, especially if they're innocent, for example. I think it's also troubling when eternal ramifications are on the line. And just because you have a bishop who is a hardliner, you run into problems. I've been asked over the years if my beliefs or stances or actions have caused me any membership problems with the church. Have you ever been called into the bishop's office? That's the question I get the most. Or as I've written books, or when I used to blog, or since I've done these musings, I get these questions a lot too. Like, hey, have you ever gotten in trouble for the things that you say? And so those are the questions that I was thinking about last night when we watched this polytheistic Mayan, dance production, about what belief means. That belief is one thing. I don't think anyone has any issue there, but what is belief if you cannot act on it? I think belief implies or requires even that there's going to be action consistent with that belief. As I've talked about before, I don't see the gospel as in a different bucket from, our political beliefs and activities or work or family, right? I see the gospel and everything else all in one bucket. And what's the point of the gospel if it is not impacting the rest of our life? My criticism often is that hardly anyone really applies the gospel to their political life. They kind of have this separation of church and personal political belief. I can vote for whoever I want, whatever policies I want. Principles compatible with the gospel may be found in any political party. It says may, it doesn't say are. It doesn't say they are found in different parties. The church's position just says, they may be found in different political parties. And sure, maybe to some varying tiny, minute degree. But the point is that I think the gospel has to affect us in every aspect of our life. And therefore, belief modifies action. Our actions are an outgrowth of our belief. If I believe that agency is fundamental, then I should act that way and I should advocate that way. I should teach others truth. I should espouse my beliefs. And so I don't really think it's possible or advisable, perhaps, even if it is possible, to believe something, but to just keep that in your head. Because you might argue that if you believe something, then you fight for it. You advocate for it. You encourage it. You promote it. You pursue it. Otherwise, do you really believe it? If I believe in Christ, and if I believe Christ, then I'm going to do what he said, and I'm going to follow him. By the way, Stephen Robinson's Believing Christ, I think is what it was called. I read that like 20 years ago. Good book. Short book. It's right up there, up on my shelf. But I really love how he points out that it's not enough to just believe in Christ. We need to believe Christ. We need to believe what he says and act accordingly. So if we have these beliefs, then we act. If you love me, keep my commandments. If you believe me, basically, right, do what I'm telling you. So the title of this provocatively titled post, right, Should I Be Excommunicated, is getting at this idea of, if I believe things that my bishop or a future bishop or whatever thinks is problematic, should I be punished for that? Should we have a church in which people who believe something that maybe is at odds to varying degrees with the conventional position of church leadership, maybe that's, legalizing medical marijuana in Utah as an example, when they're advocating for everyone to vote the other way, or, legalizing alcohol, back when the president of the church was pushing for the campaign and telling everyone to not, repeal the constitutional amendment, which was prohibition. Or, if you espoused before 1978, 8, if you espoused the idea that black people should have the priesthood, take today a provocative one that I disagree with, but people within the church who say that women should be ordained to the priesthood. So if people have a belief, let's say in Heavenly Mother, and they advocate that we should be able to pray to Heavenly Mother, and the church leaders say, no, don't do that, as some of them recently have and are, then what are the boundaries around that? What are the circumstances in which someone should be punished? Now, I should note, despite my title, that the church recently, within the past year, I think, changed its terminology. So no longer is it called excommunication. It is now a withdrawal of membership. And no longer is it called being disfellowshipped. It is formal membership restrictions, which is interesting because I think words matter. Excommunication is this very archaic and significant word, but a withdrawal of membership, it is we are withdrawing from you and leaving you alone, almost like shunning in societies of old, where the biggest punishment when you were on the frontier is that you'd be kicked out of the village and and be shunned by everyone. That was a significant deterrent to bad behavior. So what are the boundaries around that? How do you decide if and when to punish someone for belief that is at odds with the conventional approach or the stated official policy of the church, or with the understanding and interpretation of the local leader, the bishop? There's this quote from Joseph Smith that you've probably heard before. Here it is. And he says, "I never thought it was right to call up a man and try him because he erred in doctrine. It looks too much like Methodism and not like Latter-day Saintism. Methodists have creeds which a man must believe or be kicked out of their church. I want the liberty of believing as I please. It feels so good not to be trammeled." And Joseph had investigated Methodism, like before, getting his revelation, and I think even after. And so it's something that he was very familiar with. And Methodism is not certainly the only church that has its creeds, but it's an interesting quote, right? Like, I want the liberty of believing whatever I want. I want, to Latter-day Saintism, according to Joseph, was, at the time at least, accommodating of people being able to believe what they wanted. But then, like, how do you manage that, right? Because the devil's advocate would say, well, if we just allow anyone to advocate for whatever they want, then we kind of pollute the church, if you will. We allow discordant voices to come in. But then I think, like, the early missionaries, how did they have so much success? It was in large part because pastors and preachers at the time would allow these Latter-day Saint missionaries to come and preach their doctrine from the pulpit, from these other churches. I mean, Sidney Rigdon and the Campbellites and all these like early churches, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, hey, Mormon missionaries, come tell us what you believe." And they would allow these people from other sects to come in and talk about their other faith. And so what would that look like for us, right? To be accommodating within our church. We are very correlated. We're very homogenized. We're very fearful of contrary ideas. And I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. I don't think it should be a free-for-all. I don't think it should be like, hey, let's have the crazies like come on in and, preach whatever they want. On the other hand, like, it's interesting to, like, have you ever been to like a Catholic mass or go to other church services? Are we open-minded enough and tolerant enough and confident enough in our own beliefs to interact with or attend the services of other people? Or, I mean, what would it be like to invite one of them to come preach at our pulpit and find common ground or whatever? So anyways, the devil's advocate point would be like, look, Joseph Smith in that quote I read was talking about belief. Sure, any Latter-day Saint can believe whatever they want. We're not going to punish people for their belief. It's only when they encourage others to believe like them. It's only if you encourage others to, pray to Heavenly Mother, or to encourage others to believe that women should be ordained to the priesthood, or, that civil disobedience is okay, or whatever the issue is. It's the preaching, it's the converting, it's the, the people out there, the Denver Snuffers, and what was the crazy guy up in Idaho that Chad Daybell, right? These like little pockets of people who try and build their own little fiefdoms and followings. And so the brethren are looking at that, right? And they're like, we're worried because if we have people in the church trying to like pull people down those paths. So like, I get it, right? I get that there's a reason behind the desire to kind of keep people on the straight and narrow. But the problem is that church leaders aren't perfect, and current policy, and you might even say doctrine, is not final. It's subject to amendment and revelation and change by decision of unanimity by the church leaders, even if that may not be in a revelation. So these things are fluid. And if we have a system that is inflexible, or if we have local leaders who are inflexible, like Helmut Hubener's branch president who tried to excommunicate him because he was advocating against the Nazis, consistent with his faith, then we run the risk of punishing quote-unquote innocent people, right? We run the risk of people who are doing the right thing being punished by leaders who are making the wrong decision. So I don't know what the answer is here. This is more of an open-ended musing, because I think there's prudence in having some type of guardrails for an organization to police its members, you might say, quote unquote, and make sure that you don't have your organization being used as a platform to recruit people for, going off on tangents and so forth, following these other little fiefdoms that people are trying to grow. So like, I get it from that standpoint. I think that's prudent. It's pragmatic. It makes sense. But the problem, I think of it like Elon Musk, right? He's in the process of buying Twitter. And one of his objections is people getting permanently banned off of Twitter. So what did he say? He said his idea was probably not a good idea to permanently ban someone. Instead, we should give people, he said, a timeout. So it's this idea of like, if you do something problematic, maybe you get a warning where you can't use the service for, a month. And so that the equivalent of that would be, let's not excommunicate someone, Bob, we'll say, if he's out believing the wrong things and preaching and sharing the wrong things. But maybe we can, impose those, what was it called? The new disfellowshipping, the formal membership restrictions. I don't know. So maybe that's the right approach, is to kind of withhold a little bit. I don't know that this is happening a lot. I mean, there was the September 6th back in the day in the 70s, I believe it was. And there's certainly been vocal people in the past who ran afoul of certain church leaders and were targeted for disfellowshipping and excommunication. And the church, I think, plays this weird thing where they always say it's a local thing, but I think everyone knows it's the open secret that sometimes you will have general authorities who then kind of communicate down to the local level and basically say, hey, look into this. I don't know that they like order the excommunication. I'm saying that very crudely, but they can say like, hey, you need to like call this person into a council and figure out what they're doing. Interestingly, I was in tithing settlement in December a few months ago, and my bishop revealed to my wife and I that during Prop 2, which I talked about, I think, last week, which was legalizing medical cannabis in Utah, which the church opposed and actively fought against, and which I was the, face of pushing. So listen to last week's musing if you missed that. I share a lot of detail about that there. But the bishop revealed that during Prop 2, he got complaints about me filed directly to him, people who were not even in our ward. None of these people were in the ward. They were just like random malcontents who found my bishop's information, I guess looked me up on county records or something and found which bishop is in I don't know what they did, but they reported me to my bishop. He never brought it up at the time. I only found out this past December, like 4 years after the fact. He's like, oh, hey, did I ever tell you this? I'm like, no, you most definitely did not tell me. Could have probably assumed, I guess, but I never asked and he never said. So he tells me in tithing summit, he's like, yeah, so at the time I didn't know what to do with this. I was a fairly new bishop. So I emailed the stake president and I was like, hey, should I do anything with these, complaints or whatever? And the stake president was like, leave it alone. Don't worry about it. So it was on the instruction from the stake president that my bishop left alone. Not that my bishop would have done anything. I think my leaders know who I am and what I say and what I do, and none of that's a surprise. And again, like, hopefully anyone who's watching this musing senses like there's a line, right? Like, despite me having ideas that are, shall we say, off the beaten path, I would say still along the straight and narrow, but maybe closer to the edge than the middle. I don't know. I believe things that I would say are the mainstream members of our church don't, and that the traditions of our fathers sometimes conflict with. I believe that's a good thing, but again, like, it is what it is. I don't have a very, middle of the road traditional thing. So despite having these kind of beliefs or whatever, right? Like, my desire is to come closer to Christ. My desire is to encourage others to do the same. I am not trying to set up any kind of fiefdom. I do these musings more for me than any of you. It's just a side benefit if any of you want to listen along and be benefited along the way. I personally benefit from spending time thinking about these things and processing them and reading and researching and so forth. So like, I'm not interested in a fiefdom here. Please don't follow me or do any of these things. Like, go find your own path. And so, I'm trying to point people to Christ as I myself am trying to, point myself to Christ. And so I want to build up testimony. If I want to help people uncake themselves from these layers of traditions of our fathers and cultural baggage that encumber our pure testimony. And so in that sense, I feel like anything I've always been advocating, I'm always safe. Like I've never felt threatened or worried that I would be called in by my bishop or my stake president. Interesting little tangent. If some of you remember last fall, there was a teacher who went viral first day of school in Lehigh for criticizing her students for supporting Donald Trump. This was literally like the first day of school. Went national. Everyone was all aflutter about it. And so the principal of that school, it's Lehigh High School, is my stake president as of now. So he's a pretty cool dude, but kind of interesting. So he's the local principal. He got to deal with that on his first day of school. Anywho, so I've never felt worried of being called into the bishop's office or anything. My local leaders are not, hardliner, like, I'm going to ruthlessly enforce things and anyone who deviates from, but like those people are out there, right? Like if I happened to live somewhere else, maybe I would have been excommunicated by now because I did publicly fight the church and its leaders or go against them, not in an effort to persuade anyone to join another church or believe other things or whatever, but like I've been at odds politically with the church. Go listen to last week's if you missed it. I share a lot of detail. But I guess the point is, like, had I lived somewhere else, I could have had a bishop that would have initiated some type of council and proceedings or you could have leaders who would listen to any of these musings and say, the things that you're saying are not approved by the brethren, or the brethren have said, like, this isn't okay, and Connor, you're talking about this or whatever. And hey, you're saying, the vaccine is wrong and not to get it. And, the president of our church has urged everyone to do it. And so you're out there advocating for something different because you don't think people should wear masks and get the jab. So we're going to punish you. Like, that's possible. It's procedurally appropriate. Local leaders have that power. And there are local leaders out there who would or do wield their power accordingly. I just got a message the other day. I have no way of verifying this. I didn't reply, but like these claims are out there that this lady said, I believe it was her sister and her husband got excommunicated because they were publicly saying that that people shouldn't get the vaccine, despite the president of the church urging everyone to do it and saying it was safe and effective. Again, there may be other issues there. That may be a claim. I think we all know that a lot of times when people get excommunicated, they claim one thing publicly, but in reality, it could be very well different. So I'm not putting a lot of stock in that. I'm just saying the claims are out there, and it's procedurally possible. It is possible for a bishop to go through that, call a stake council, do all these things because you are publicly taking a stance against the brethren. And I've done that. So if I live somewhere else, that could happen to me. Leadership roulette, and that I think is one of the downsides of this kind of local control concept of the church. It has its positives, but it has its negatives too. But I've never felt worried. I've never felt like I'm going to be punished for any of this. I think of like Helmut Humener, and his branch president didn't excommunicate him the right way, so he was never actually excommunicated, and the church headquarters overturned whatever the branch president did anyway. But like at the end of the day, it's like, even if in the worst case scenario, my membership was formally withdrawn in a worst case scenario where I got pulled in by a hardline bishop and he didn't like something that I said, even in that worst case, like I would still feel at peace because I think God sorts it all out, right? I think the injustices of some local leadership roulette that maybe was too hardline and shouldn't have done that. Like, I don't think that individual who got excommunicated is going to be eternally damned because they had a stupid, local high council that decided that. Like, I think there's justice and there's mercy, and both of them can correct an excommunication gone wrong. Because if we have a church, or should, like Joseph said, that doesn't punish people for not believing in creeds and, therefore acting in conformity with your beliefs, like I think God sorts it all out. So if that ever happened to me, certainly some people, like you see people who get excommunicated and they're like, oh, finally I can drink and I can do whatever, and like their life totally changes. That's not me. Like, even in this worst case scenario, I feel like I believe the same things. I'm going to do the same things. I'll run kind of parallel to the church. My family will still attend. I'll still support them. Like I'll be a believer in every sense of the word, and I'll attend meetings and whatever to the extent that they would allow me, again, under this worst case scenario. And I feel like God will sort it out, and I can still have the right relationship and still act in a way and have love in my heart and love towards others and try and do all these things, even if the organization, imperfect as it is, run by imperfect people, there's mercy there for like leaders to do the wrong things, and that God can sort it out in the end. So I don't anticipate that happening. I don't want that to happen. I'm not seeking that. I'm not expecting it, but it could happen. And even if it happened, my relationship with God is between me and him. And I think there's justice and mercy in the end if anything goes haywire. But I love this quote, right? Like Joseph Smith, that I want the liberty of believing as I please. It feels so good not to be trammeled. And I like that quote. And I feel like there's room for that within the church. I feel like I kind of do that. I believe the things that I do. I believe a bit differently than many people in the church. I can talk about it. I talk about it in gospel doctrine. I can shoot the breeze with the bishop and have a conversation about these types of things. But I don't know. It's just interesting because there's not a lot of leaders out there. So all of this was triggered by polytheistic Mayans becoming Catholics during the Spanish conquistadores. For those who joined late, I just got back from Cancun and was thinking about a lot of this there. But I don't know. Like, my beliefs have evolved. I'm guessing yours have too, and I'm guessing that they will continue to do so. And I think the church evolves. And I mean, I think there's some doctrines, obviously, that aren't changing. I don't think that everything is up for grabs and whatever. But like, I don't think the restoration is done. I think there's all kinds of stuff in the sealed portion of the plates that would blow our minds. And we're not ready for it because we've treated lightly the things that we've received, and we're still under condemnation. And so we have to be open. Like, if we believe in our faith, it requires us to believe that God will yet reveal many more things. And so we have to be open to the fact that some of the things we believe is wrong. Just like the early saints coming from, Methodism or whatever had to change their beliefs. Just like the polytheistic Mayans changed theirs. And so we sometimes think in the church, I think that like we're done and my beliefs are like fit within this, this neat little package, and I'll never have to be open-minded and change. Like, no, like, plus even with what we should be believing right now with the limited restoration and knowledge and truth that have been restored, there's all kinds of cultural baggage and traditions of our fathers saturating the whole thing. And Babylonian awfulness permeating it that we're just like creating all these problems with as people. So our beliefs have to change right now, let alone how they have to change when we get new stuff down the road, right? So I think we have to be open-minded to other people believing differently than us. I was, narrow-minded before, thinking, oh, I'm a returned missionary. I now understand everything. And oh, those crazy people who believe these other things, they're apostate or whatever, right? And so I had to evolve. I had to understand that it's okay to have this broader umbrella of belief. We're all on a journey. The people we think that are totally wrong may in fact be right. Just like everyone thought that blacks were inferior, unrighteous people that would never get the priesthood. And then one day they could. And they weren't. And they did. And things changed. So, I don't know. We just have to, I think, not judge or shame or excommunicate one another for believing different things and even advocating for those things, provided that it is all done with an effort to build our relationship with God, to have more love towards one another, to better follow the commandments, to build up testimony. Certainly there are people who believe and act upon those beliefs in ways that are designed to tear down or distract or build up their own fiefdoms. And that's probably the separating line. That's probably where, formal membership restrictions and withdrawal makes sense, because you want to protect the flock. So I get it. But yeah, that's it. Back from Cancun, didn't have COVID, flying to Switzerland in 2 days. So on a little bit of a journey, collecting some stamps in my passport. But I've kept up the Sunday musing tradition. It's 11:49 at night. I was able to get one before Sunday is over. So hope you guys all have an awesome week. Thanks for listening. And have a great final few minutes for those listening live to your Sunday. We'll catch you next week.